Welcome to Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I'm your host, Phillip Boutté Jr. Today's episode is sponsored by Western Costume.
Hi, I'm Gilbert Musali, the new president and CEO of Western Costume, welcoming Designing Hollywood back to Western. This is our men's tailor shop, where we're custom making clothes all the time, alterations. This is our women's custom made. We can make anything you guys need us to make, alter anything. We can deck out a full army if you want in our military department. Thank you, Designing Hollywood, for coming in to see Western Costume. Hope to see you soon.
Designing Hollywood podcast show is dedicated to all things movies and its industry professionals. Our guest today had quite the year in 2022, designing two films that were, by all intents and purposes, polar opposites of each other. Lift, starring Kevin Hart, and The Book of Clarence, starring Lakeith Stanfield, could not be more different, but they have one glorious thing in common. Our guest today and my friend, none other than the wonderful costume designer, Miss Antoinette Messam. Welcome to the show, Antoinette. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much. What a wonderful intro.
I'm glad that you are joining me today. I want to talk about these films, and I want to talk about the year that you had in designing them, because they could not be more different. But before that, I have one just kind of like simple question for you, which is, can you share a defining moment in your career when you knew that costume design was your true calling?
I would say that when I got I guess I was privileged. I was working as a buyer for a designer that recommended me as a costume designer for a TV series called Catwalk, and it was MTV, and they were more interested in a stylist than they were a costume designer. And she recommended me because I was straddling both worlds at the time. I was still styling, but buying in film. And when I read the script and started to think about the characters in their closets and what I was going to create with this world, which was basically one big music video every episode, but their lives intertwined, I was so excited. And then it was like, oh my God, I love this. This is what I want to do. Like I'm building a world, and I'm creating stories, walk and talk in the action with their closets. So it's not just like one outfit or a couple of great outfits for a music video or a commercial. It's how many changes do they have, and what are the beats within that story that I get to, is their clothes going to be fresh and brand new, or is it going to be lived in and old? Is it going to be ratty? Is it going to be dirty? Like all those things I got to do, and not just do, but think about and work with a team to create. And I just love that process. I love taking what was on the script and bringing it to life. And that's when I knew with my first TV series that I walked into it thinking, oh, I'll just be doing a weekly music video. But it wasn't. Mm-hmm. I was building an arc. I was creating these actors' story over a period of, back then it was like 24, 26 episodes a year of my life.
That's pretty incredible. I think that's one of my favorite things, is that shift. A lot of us have that shifting moment, and you've described it perfectly, where it's like you go from like the visual of the job where you're just like, okay, I'm going to be dressing people, or I'm going to be figuring out what they're wearing. And then you realize that you're actually full blown storytelling. And that's where the fun part is, right? Like really kind of breaking down the characters, figuring out why they put these things on. It's like a full, it's a full exercise in storytelling. And I think that that's just the greatest part. So it's good to see that there's that transition there, and that you just kind of kept going and didn't stop,
Yeah.
That's like our boring question, but I want to get right into these films. So I want you to talk to me about Lift and kind of how that project came about. And then also like kind of how you started to kind of break that down, knowing that also Kevin Hart is usually coming from, people see him more on the comedy side. So now you're kind of taking this character where it's more grounded and serious and action based. So talk to us about all of those things.
Wow. I was surprised. I got a call from my agent. It was the end of 2021 and December 2021. And he got a call. He says he just got a call direct from F. Gary Gray, wanted to talk to me about doing a movie with him. He was a big fan of The Harder They Fall, and he wanted me to bring that aesthetic, that stylized, I mean, The Harder They Fall was period, and Lift is very contemporary. But
Right.
there was something to what he called my stylized way of designing that he wanted to bring to this contemporary film. And my agent said, "Are you interested?" And all interested, I was honored, but also too, we're going to Europe, London, Belfast. Okay, sign me up. So I read the script, and then it was really intriguing because it was like, oh, this is a little different for Kevin Hart. And then I met with um, Mr. Gray and also with Kevin, and we had a, Kevin was a producer on the project as well,
Mhm.
so we had a meeting, and um, I was up for the challenge because it was going to be a challenge. It was a big film. I'd never worked in Europe before. I didn't have a team. And at that time, I wasn't able to bring somebody. It was after COVID. So I don't know. I mean, you would think that, oh, it's a contemporary movie, no problem. This was more than a contemporary movie, and it's hard
Mhm.
to see that right off the bat because not many people are aware that each of these characters, they're art thieves, they're burglars,
Mhm.
high end, they steal from those who they feel don't deserve or don't need it.
Mhm.
But each heist, and you see it within the first 10, 15 minutes of the movie, they dress up to play different parts. And that's what I found the most exciting and the most intriguing part of this film. I've done contemporary films before, I've done contemporary TV series before. What made this one different is that within their contemporary real life, their everyday style, they also got to flip the switch and change up to become different people when they stole an art piece,
Mhm.
right? And the whole thing about this movie is they're not stealing art, they're stealing gold, and they're
Right.
stealing it on a
Right.
plane. And working with actors like, you know, oh my God, D'Onofrio,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
completely immersed in his characters. And he was the most fun, if you want my humble opinion,
Mhm.
because each time we saw him, he was a different
It
character
was different.
and became that person. And they say he had different aliases. I don't know what they called it. I just knew the man created each of those aliens. Like we literally started from the ground up, where he would get his, we'd meet with hair and makeup and discuss who he was going to be in that
Mhm.
role, whether he was going to be a Texas oil man or someone who was, a gay man who was flamboyant with blonde wig, and he wore different wigs and
Mhm.
and different, beards and stuff and accessories. And he'd get the hair and makeup done, and then I'd do the fitting, and then we'd go outside and I'd videotape him. And he'd look back at it and figure out what he wanted to tweak. It was so collaborative, so much fun. And one of the joys of doing that movie is getting to work with actors where you could build these costumes that help them tell the story, you know? I mean, that was extreme. And then you have something as simple as, oh, I love that jumpsuit. That'd be perfect for when I'm playing someone who is, and they're like, me, I live in jumpsuits.
Mhm.
And this is an actor turning to me and saying, that'd be perfect for when I'm, going into the factory and pretending to load the artwork and stealing that blue jumpsuit. that is worn, and the actor's name just slipped me. It is the same jumpsuit that you see me in all the time.
Right. Correct.
Right? So I influenced the actor in what we were going to be wearing, what he was going to be wearing in the role. So that was a lot of fun. And also, too, it's that fine line where these are young people, all in
Hmm.
30 somethings, late 20s, early 30s. And they, except for D'Onofrio and except for Kevin and maybe Gugu, who are a little older, this team were young people who had the money. Like their jeans were designer jeans.
Hmm.
Their sweaters were, like the fine details of not hitting it on the nose and being obnoxious, but dressing them that you saw just that little elevation of, oh, that's not a cheap tank top she has on. That, that she went to, some a boutique in London and bought that. And that's what I wanted to convey, that there was quiet money, not
Hmm.
loud money,
It
if
did
that
come
makes sense.
across, it did. It came across really well because you can tell in elevation, especially when there's softer scenes like just between Kevin and Gugu, where you can tell that they're dressed more like themselves versus when they're out in the field, and they're kind of doing their
Hmm.
respective jobs. I think it also, to me, it felt like kind of like costume design inception, like almost like a dream within a dream, but it was like a costume within a
Yeah,
costume. So it's
yeah,
cool to
yeah.
see characters. It adds another elevation and a level to it, especially if you're a fan of costume design, to watch this film and realize that there's the subliminal kind of costume design of the character themselves and what they would wear personally. And then there's the design of this person in this film or this character dressing up to play someone else. And that
Yeah,
happens throughout the entire film, which is just a really cool, it's like a double assignment.
yeah,
And it's happening all
exactly.
over the world. Like there's traveling going on and all these things, and
Mm.
kind of the whole undercurrent of it. There was also too. I really liked the within that opening kind of heist, the hoodie that you designed, kind of like for the NFT artist. Can you talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit? Kind of like the design of that and how that whole look kind of came
Wow.
together.
Okay. What should have been the simplest costume in the entire movie? Finding the right hoodie
Mm-hmm.
before I even had the cast that, Gary liked.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's coming from a life of living in hoodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it had to be the perfect hoodie to frame the face and the
Mm-hmm.
mask cover the face, but not be too baggy so that the
Mm-hmm.
head is lost in there and the mask is, so it had to fit perfectly. I almost should have made it from scratch. It was that specific.
Yeah.
And then of course the graphic, that took a moment because we needed something that not only worked on the back of the sweatshirt hoodie, but also for the mask of
For
the
the mask
face.
itself. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that the reveal was funny and goofy when you figured out who it was.
It was great though, because what it did is, one of the things that I noticed about it, it's more graphic and it's such a quick moment, but it also really separated out the artist and his team within the chaos of
Yeah.
that opening sequence where you can tell who's who. It was very graphic and very direct. And then it kind of helped with the kind of misdirection that the team kind of provides. I don't want to ruin it for you if you haven't watched it, but you should watch it. It was a really fun sequence. But it kind of helped with that misdirection because it gave you places to focus. And even as the viewer, when you're focused on that, you're missing that something else is happening, which is kind of cool. I thought
Yeah.
that it really worked well.
I don't know if you remember this. I was having a hard time finding a graphic artist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was so long ago, like January or February 2022. And
Mm-hmm.
I reached out to you and you shared someone with me who was fantastic. And I think they were in Brazil. So at the time, I can't remember if I was in London or Belfast.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm working with someone in Brazil to create something we're going to shoot in Venice. That
Right.
is the ultimate world. You know what I mean? And the actual hoodie was made for me by a dear who's become a dear friend, Ben Amina out of Box Raw. So I met them on Creed, and he created this sweatshirt that with the right neck specifications that I needed and the neckline and the size. And then they had to ship it in mass to me from Wales. And so I would get it in oh, it was a lot.
I
When I
just and
think back about it.
I do, it's a lot, but I want to point to the work, which is what's great about this story, for even a
Mhm.
lot of our viewers watching at home, is I don't think that people recognize how difficult the work can actually be, or how something so simple that you see on screen and you would just assume like, oh, they went to a screen printer and just did whatever. Like,
Oh
costume design
no.
is so layered and so detailed and so micro focused sometimes, and the amount of things and resources that you have to pull when you're working abroad, right, when you're not like home in your element and you have to like find things and figure it out. So to know that just that happened for that one thing, then you can only imagine the amount of work it takes to costume
Oh,
design everything, or to even just get the main cast dressed every day, you know what I
okay.
mean?
I have to share this because
Please.
you're bringing stuff back. I've done, except for sci-fi, I've done pretty much every genre. And contemporary is incredibly challenging
Hmm.
because, of course, everyone has a voice in contemporary. But when you're thinking about I'm in Belfast, where am I going to find a Texas baron, oil baron's suit? And they have a very distinctive Western styled
Hmm.
blazer and pant, that you can get some of it in Los Angeles, but more often than not, to get the best stuff is out of Texas and Arizona and those places. And I literally had to have it ordered, shipped to LA, then shipped to London. We almost were going to put a buyer on a plane to bring the costume to us in London because Brexit is a thing. And Northern Ireland, Belfast is the UK. So it's separated from the rest of the world in terms of if I buy in Italy, it's coming, it's not just Europe anymore where we could just ship it. It's going through customs and it has a whole different layer of sometimes it's faster to get stuff from the US than is different parts of Europe because of Brexit. So I'm doing an action film that everybody needed multiples.
Hmm. Hmm.
Multiples. I ended up having one person on my team that's all she did. Track the multiples and got them to wherever I needed them to be in the world. And when I say that, at one point we were prepping and shooting second unit in Northern Ireland or London while I was in different places in Italy.
Hmm.
So she was sending to main unit, she was sending to second unit, and it was coming from different places in the world. And I'm like, if I'd known this going into the film, what could I have done differently? you know? And a
Correct.
lot of it, of course, is all about casting, right? And I'm in Belfast. It's great shopping, 2 hours drive over to Dublin, but that's
Hmm.
another country.
Right. Right.
And you
Right
literally
away.
see yourself the line where it says crossing into Ireland.
Hmm.
Right? So yeah, it was supposedly on paper it looks so easy, just dress them in really cute clothes. But by the time we were in the full swing of it, I had two buyers in LA. No, I had an ACD and a buyer in LA.
Okay.
I had a team in London because we prepped for 6 weeks in London, and then they decided they weren't going to shoot the opening in London anymore. They were going to move it to Venice, Italy. So then we packed up and moved the base to Belfast, where our studio was, and then I sent an Belfast ACD to Italy to start getting the setup there, to start setting up shop there. And because all those uniforms, all those costumes, those historical costumes for the carnival
Hmm.
was pulled from different, was pulled from Milan, was pulled from Venice, was pulled from Rome to outfit all of our background who didn't come with their own, because some had their own, but I'd say a third had their own.
I was going to ask you about that. That's the opening sequence as we're like flying
Yeah,
over and we see all those historical masks and all the, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's cool.
yeah,
And that's like, I mean,
yeah,
that's another thing. The resources, I think things can go by so quickly in a movie that people don't realize, and you just kind of take it as like a gimme, but it's not, right? So that's one of those ones where it's just like, it's definitely not an easy task to do that.
no, that was an entire team working just on that.
Working on just on that, which also I
Yeah,
think I'm going to advocate for, just because you said this and I think it's really great, and we've talked about it in previous episodes, is advocating for the costume design department out at large and the crew, and being able to have competent crew and people to help support the costume designer, and recognizing that it really does take a village. So the fact that you had a
yeah,
team helping with this big sequence while you're also designing these other things and you're kind of managing all of that, is a testament to how hard the costume department works. And then also a testament to how well you personally manage your resources, and like you're able to kind of pull things together, because that could have been a disaster,
yeah.
you know?
It could have been. And I have to say, my background as a stylist really helped. It
Mm-hmm.
really did. We had to go outside of retail and hit the designers, calling Armani and saying, I have Gugu who's worn Armani before, and I have Sam Worthington. And, I had to have the ACD that was in Belfast while I was in Italy go to New York, pull from the Armani store there that I set up in Italy, pull from the Armani store there, and go to a hotel and do a fitting with him while I'm on FaceTime.
Wow.
And then fly with
And
those
then fly, yeah,
costumes to Italy.
right.
Because he's then meeting us in Italy with his family. And those that I had to do that several times to work with designers in order to, one, the multiples we needed, but also the level of, I guess, not only design and classicness, but quality that I needed,
Yeah.
you know? Um, but it, it, you draw on the resources and your experience and friends.
Mm-hmm.
You know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Help. Who can you recommend who can do this alteration? We're going to be in, London for 2 weeks. And, so it was, to say it takes a village is the generally what we say, because we're only as good as our team. But I couldn't have done this without my resources, my contacts, my,
Mm-hmm.
pulling up that database and like, wow, Ralph Lauren, we work together great on The Harder They Fall. I'd love to be able to reach out to you about this movie,
Mm-hmm.
which is completely different. And
Mm-hmm.
what do you have that would look great on Gugu, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
And then
And
do
then
you
there was
have,
Kevin.
well, I mean, oh no, well, that's, talk to me about, because Kevin presents a specific design kind of like thing too, in terms of his stature and just kind of like his proportions, and how you were kind of costume and like designing for him. Because he looks great in
Yeah,
the film, and he actually looks of stature, like he looks tall. So can you explain how
yeah.
you kind of made him feel that way?
Amazing Taylor.
That's what it felt like.
We started with a tailor that Kevin loves so much. He had him tailoring his own clothes for appearances after the film. I'm like, hold on a minute, isn't that my tailor? What are you doing here? Oh, Kevin flew me in to do a fitting because he was based in London. His family for many generations had a tailor shop just on outside of
Mhm.
Savile Row in Soho, and we started prepping in London, and then he and I flew to LA to fit with Kevin, and that was a whirlwind, 3 days in and out. Flew to back to LA to fit with Kevin, and then he proceeded to make the majority of his tailored clothes, his pants, his suits, his coat, his jackets. Um, I mean, what I bought for Kevin was, some soft goods, some knitwear,
Mhm.
um, you know, casual stuff. We had, it was, I'd say we custom made 3/4 of Kevin's costumes.
That's what I was going to ask, is how much made to order you
Hmm.
did versus how much you shopped. But I could tell, I think one of the key tells for a lot of people that are watching at home, even if you're watching something contemporary, you can tell certain things are custom made. Just think about you buying your regular clothes and how they fit just
Hmm.
off the rack. And then look at how good the stars look in those clothes. And usually that's a good tell to say, oh, either something was tailored or it was custom made
Hmm.
for them. Like where you're like, you can't just buy that shirt and have it fit that well just straight out of the store, right? And Kevin looked great.
No.
Like his costumes looked great. I think that it really made him look stylish. He looked in charge. He looked elegant a lot of the times. He just looked suave, and I feel like that was the testament to like the work that you did, because it was a different way of viewing him that we haven't seen him before.
Oh my goodness. Everything was done. I mean, if I'd had time, I would have made his shoes,
Hmm.
but we
Hmm.
didn't. We Paul Smith footwear looked great on him. We bought even the stuff we bought, like there's an opening sequence with him in that dark olive, forest green olive, velour polo top. I still had to alter it.
Hmm.
Everything needed to be, proportion wise altered to fit him. I find sometimes in real life his stuff looks a little bit long,
Hmm.
proportion wise on him, and I just raised waistlines and shaped Taylor, because his upper body's fairly proportioned, but um, still stuff needed tweaking just to make it look like it was made for him.
No, we laugh because I mean, there's been several movies. I think even for himself, he kind of self-deprecates and he talks about being shorter. But for a shorter
Hmm.
person, he's very equally proportioned and he's in good shape.
Yeah.
So I think that if you can actually costume design and bring that out, it actually works to his advantage, which I felt like you did here. So kudos to you, because I think that you can tell it did look different. It felt like it kind of introduced him back to the general public in a way that we hadn't seen before. And it was
Hmm.
fun to watch too. And I wanted to talk about really quickly, because I think it's a bridge into talking about our next thing, is your prep. How much prep did you have for Lyft?
Wow.
Like, do you remember about how much prep time you had?
I would say we had a couple of weeks before the holidays,
Hmm.
which would have made it 8 weeks prep, I think. But to me, they didn't really count because so much of the bulk of what I needed to do happened in Europe.
Hmm.
So even though I was here, and I mean, how much can you get done before Christmas?
When
It's
everything's shutting down,
challenging.
it's very
So all
challenging.
that, yeah, that was just like pre-prep of looking at lines, checking stuff out, meeting with Kevin in person, getting him measured, stuff like that, which was pointless because he went on you know, a diet and a workout regimen, which of course changed
Change
his
sizes.
entire
Yeah.
shape,
Hmm.
you know? So, yeah, I would say about 8 weeks prep,
And then how
to be
much prep did you
honest.
have for the next film we're going to talk about, which is Book of Clarence?
No prep.
Yeah.
I got the call about that movie when we were 12 weeks out. By the time I landed in Italy, I think we were 8 weeks out. And then
Okay.
you crew and then resources. And it was just, we were chasing our tail right till the very end of that movie.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because I wanted to segue into that because of the prep time. I kind of set you up
Hmm.
for that because when you watch this
Thanks.
movie, no, serious, when you watch this movie, to know that you only had kind of like an 8 week prep period for the amount of costumes, the amount of like custom made things, and then also the textures, the color palettes, the dyeing, the aging dyeing, like everything in Book of Clarence is so rich with texture and design, and kind of customization. That's really a testament to the fact that you know what you're doing. The fact that that was 8 weeks, like I think a lot of people would have a full blown panic attack at this point.
I
Um,
had friends telling me I was crazy. Costume designer friends like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? James Samuel called. I was honored that he called me a
Mm-hmm.
second time. We were up against it because we had a tight in and out with Benedict Cumberbatch. So what are we going to do? It's like the movie's greenlit because we have this cast and this is the dates the cast is available. So you're going now, period.
Since you brought it up, we can talk about it and then we'll go back and talk about the mains. But talk about Benedict Cumberbatch, because that was probably one of the most fun, surprising things of of the entire film. Because we start with him, which is kind of thing, and you
Yeah.
have no idea. So talk about that process and kind of what it was like working with him.
Well, I knew that he was in the movie when I got the call because
Okay.
he was, they hired him to be that person, Benjamin the beggar, and AKA the Messiah we all thought was the
Mm-hmm.
Messiah growing up our whole lives. But I also knew that Clarence, our lead actor, was Lakeith Stanfield.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew those two were going into the movie, and I suspected R.J. Seiler was going to be Elijah because just
Mm-hmm.
how it read, I didn't know who else could play that part,
Mm-hmm.
and it felt like it was written for him, and it did end up being his.
It's really good.
Um, so the first person confirmed, and it's like, this is your cast, was Benedict Cumberbatch. So, I was able to get his measurements very quickly, but it took me a second to figure out what I was going to do with him.
Mm-hmm.
I was given the visual from my director of the dirtiest man in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you Google the dirtiest man in the world, this image comes up of this filthy, like his skin looked like it was encrusted with dirt and his hair matted and the clothes were just dark and ratty on him. So I knew the tone and I knew the aesthetic that we were trying to achieve. But what were those clothes before they got to that point? Like, who was this man? So that was I struggled with. And I mean, we knew that underneath it all would be a tunic because that was a base silhouette.
Mm-hmm.
So how am I going to layer? It just felt like it needed to be more than just the layers of cloaks, the robes on top of tunics that you saw back then, especially for warmth or whatever action or purpose this person had in their life. And then I discovered an image of a Roman with these wraps, this cross wraps across their chest
Mm-hmm.
of fabric, folds of fabric. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I started to drape it. And thankfully, our junior design assistant took pictures of me draping it. Like I was literally on the floor draping it with my first cutter, Fabiola, who didn't speak English, but she understood my actions.
She understood what was going on.
We knew what we were trying. Like we had the picture there and we were playing. And, this person had a short tunic on with legs and the full gladiator type boots, but we made his longer. And I just felt the story that this man started in Rome and lost
Mm-hmm.
his way or his income or something happened to him and he made his way to Jerusalem. And he was, in need of support, in need of help. Because even in the last scene, you hear him say, I've been ignored.
Mm-hmm.
No one's paid attention to me. And those words was what I needed to design the color palette because
Mm-hmm.
that opening scene, it took you a minute to realize that was him on the ground.
Yep.
He needed to disappear into the woodwork. If he was bundled up on the floor, he could be a sack. He could be, a sack of vegetables and you wouldn't even know it was a person.
He was so
And
covered and his color palette was so like down. It really was like the same as the road. Like you said, if he laid
yeah,
down, he would probably look like he was just a part of the ground, right? And the other
exactly.
characters are
Yeah.
larger than life. He's also shot from a higher angle because they're on their carriages or whatever. So it's like he's just down and then everything is above and then he's just kind of dismissed, right? To the point that
Yeah.
when I watched the movie, I had no idea it was him until way later. Like it just went by as he was just a beggar, which was really cool. And texture wise, the textures that you were using, I just really want to call them out because like the robes and the things like, and then like even like some of the hoods and the kind of like the folds and the way like everything that you were using just felt like you really wanted to like, I would love to see these costumes displayed so you can touch them because they just felt like they had so much in them. But also your aging dying was some of the best I've seen. It all looked like it didn't look overdone. It didn't look heavy. It all
Mm-hmm.
looks like very organic and true to the time period and true to your like overall vision of like, it just felt lived in. Everything either felt lived in
Well,
or like perfect.
it's really, really interesting that you say that because that was a fine line I had to walk with the aging. Um, James Samuel is very specific about aging.
Hmm. Hmm.
His aesthetic, especially with people of color, is I don't want them dirty unless
Hmm.
there's a specific reason in the story for them to be dirty.
Right.
This is not the movie he's making. And dusty is one thing,
Hmm.
but there's no reason just because you're poor, your clothes can't be clean.
Correct.
And even my DP was be like, well, I would have thought they'd be dirtier. And I'm
No,
like, why? What are they doing that they should be
that this
dirty?
should be dirty. No, it felt natural. Like when I say aging dying for this one, it felt like their clothes were real. It felt like they were real people. They do wash
Mm-hmm.
their clothes, but their clothes didn't feel brand new. It didn't feel like something just came out of, the tailor room and now
Yeah.
it's on this actor. It felt lived in, it felt purposeful. And then it just had the certain amount of like lived in nature to feel like, okay, yeah, this person's a part of this world, but they didn't feel like overly dirty or dusty or just like, you're like, what's going on? Why is everybody dirty? Because it just wouldn't be that way. I just felt like it felt very natural.
Well, you notice there's a scene in the movie where there's somebody doing laundry. That
Hmm.
was specific.
Hmm.
We wash our clothes.
Yeah, completely, which needed to be there. And it actually, it
Yeah.
worked. It worked really well. I wanted to start because some of my favorite characters, at least in terms of the layering that you did, were the gypsies. That like
Oh,
they're so good. They remind me of like the Lost Boys from Peter Pan. They have like that
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
quality, this like rough and tumble. They've got these darts, but then they have all these cool little like jute ropes and pouches and like all the stuff they're collecting and like holes in their they just looked really cool. So can you talk about like designing those?
Oh.
They were really fun.
Well, it started with Chase, who was a little boy who
Hmm.
played, oh God bless him, his acting is incredible. And even when we he steals Clarence's robe, and you would think, okay, let's make it a little proportioned, a little smaller, so it was drowning. He wasn't completely drowning. I wanted him to be drowning it because I
Hmm.
knew he could carry it. I just wanted these kids who were like orphans, really, like the Wild Boys who were their own family, to be eclectic, that their clothes look like things they'd stolen or grabbed or snatched or ripped off someone and wrapped around themselves or tied. You notice some of the stuff was tied because that's the only way they could wear it because
It
they,
looked great.
it, yeah,
They all
and it
had
was
their own
fun.
individualism.
Yeah, and individualism, but looking like items that they gathered.
Hmm. They
They
looked like a
gathered
unit. They
together.
looked like they were a unit together and they gathered stuff. I think there was interesting too, because it almost feels like even like maybe there was like one long, like maybe they found one piece of fabric and they cut it up and then each one of them had like a piece of it, like, but they were
Yeah.
using it in different ways. The character's name was Cabbage, by the way. It was Cabbage. Yeah.
Yeah, yes,
Um,
Cabbage. And his real name is Chase.
Yes, it's Chase.
Yeah,
So no, it
yeah.
was it was pretty great though. Like so it was a moment right at the beginning where I just was like, but I loved their design because they also have their own specific design language. You had so many different factions of people. You had townspeople, you had Romans, you have
Mm.
Clarence and Elijah, and then you have like you have soldiers and slaves. There were so many different things, and what I liked about it is that it felt like you approached all of them to where they did all fit together in this world, but then they all very clearly stood out as who they were, right? And it feels like you had
Mm-hmm.
different design language for each one to ensure that that happens. Can you talk? Well, first, before we go into that, I want to talk about Clarence and Elijah a little bit, because I thought that you see them a lot together, yet they had completely different styles, right? And then, Clarence also has a twin brother. So it's like there's a style shift there as well, right? So one thing
Mm-hmm.
that I did notice with Clarence and Elijah is that they had subliminal style, which is like they almost look like they're wearing, if you pull back and look at them, it looks like they have stylized hoodies on, because they have like the little like, but like you can see it's layered in there to where it makes them feel like it's a stylistic kind of artistic choice to kind of make them feel kind of contemporary in this historical world, but it still felt
Yeah.
historic, like biblical. It felt biblical, but it also
Yeah.
like, if you look at it just quickly, you're like, is that like, so I just want you to talk about that, because I feel like there was some trickery in design going on there, which was cool.
I love that word,
It
trickery.
was
Well,
cool.
the trickery starts with the challenge of James Samuel saying his directive for these two men were, swagger, Antoinette. I just want them
Mm-hmm.
to have swagger. I just want them to be cool, If these guys were here now, they'd be guys on the street, on the corner, selling their little weed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You've done the movies with the guys on the corner in the jeans and the hoodies and street, you know?
Mm-hmm.
If they were back in 33 AD, how do I translate that into that language, into that costume? Nothing they're wearing is modern.
Correct.
It's all biblical. It's just how they wear it,
It was
right?
really cool.
Because
It
they're
was.
both cool in their own way.
Mm-hmm. It was like, first, what I like about it, when I say the trickery of it, it's like it had depth. So it was a depth of a costume. It's first read, second read. So first read was biblical of the time period.
Mhm,
Second read was
mhm.
like, oh, there's like, well, those aren't drawstrings. And then the third read was like, that's kind of like a hoodie. Like if you squint at this, it feels like he's like wearing a hoodie. And then it feels like the other one's wearing a hoodie with a shirt with an undershirt, but it's not that. When you look at it, it's like, no, those are robes. And that's like a full, like, it's layered. So I just noticed it, and it's framed so well, especially in medium shots, right? Because you're going to see them mostly that way. It's very framed and very purposeful. But it just was cool. Like, so I just wanted to kind of call that out, that that's something that, like, it's not for nothing, or it wasn't something that just kind of goes by. Like, it was a purposeful choice. And then it also makes them really easy to spot when you're following the action of all the other sequences.
Yeah, I understood the assignment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Completely.
I did. I mean, that was the challenge, is even with, as you said, Clarence's brother Thomas. He is not a man who's on the street. He's
Mm-hmm.
conservative. His purpose is to follow his Messiah, his Lord. Um, you know, he's gone on this pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm.
Pilgrimage, is that the right word?
Mm-hmm.
And he
Pilgrimage.
pilgrimage, yeah.
I was like, why can't I say it
So
now?
we can edit that out. But his brother's open at the neck, and his t-shirt, his undershirt is open, almost like if
Mm-hmm.
there were buttons or opening, and you'd see the string, and it's open. But his is closed. He's
Yeah.
got a crew neck on.
Yeah.
It's almost preppier. If you
Correct.
could be preppy in 33 AD,
No, it was. It made him a
And
little
those
bit
are,
more arrogant, like a little bit more kind of like
yes.
stuffy.
Stuffy is the perfect word. He was
Yeah.
stuffy. And those were just the cues. And then there were actors who I got my apostles, God bless them. I love them all literally all at once. We fit them all over a series of days.
Mm-hmm.
And then they flew them back to London. And some of them have never worn these type of costumes before. They were young. If they've done theater, they may have wore costumes, but just having them in the fitting, playing, trying things on, getting into character, I had to really take into consideration the weather. It was incredibly cold. It was
Okay.
biting cold. And how can we layer and layer that it was authentic and felt organic with this person walking in the clothes and their wraps. And you know, they were all different, from different sizes, short, tall, skinny, big, and just making sure that they felt comfortable and they looked comfortable in their
Yeah.
clothes.
That's pretty interesting too,
Yeah.
because the movie does not read. The movie feels very warm. It feels like a very sunshiny, like it feels warm. So it's interesting that it was
Mhm.
cold, because it just doesn't
It
read
was
that way.
bitter cold.
It
I
doesn't
remember
read that way
saying
at
to
all.
someone, let me share this with you. I
Mm.
remember saying to somebody that we have to figure out socks. And they're like, they didn't wear socks back then. I said, how do you know they didn't wear socks back then? It was cold,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know? And I did research and found socks up to like, I think 100 AD. And they were
Wow.
just knitted tubes that were very raw and rough. And what we did, we were going to actually have a sock company make something for us. And it just
Mm-hmm.
got ridiculous, the amount of which thread and how many layers of thread. So my agent Dyer, Augusto, we got white tube socks, just the white tube cotton socks,
Mm-hmm.
and dyed and dyed and dyed them till they were that nondescript muddy color, and then went at them with the sander and the Dremel and roughed it up and then aged on top of it. So this looked like it was caked with dirt and dust, and kept their feet warm, and wrapped scraps of fabric around their ankles and their thighs.
Which is perfect. Perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect way to do it. Now, sometimes also too, the simpler thing works the best. Like when you take something and kind of
right?
like transform it, as opposed to like doing it custom, to a degree. But I think that that ends up
Well,
turning into its
also,
own thing.
we had no money for that. It
Yeah.
just, the price point just it became like my entire costume budget by
Yeah,
the
which is
time
like
we were
no.
done.
Yeah.
For socks.
Yeah, for like no, 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 no. And I think there. I wanted to try to, before I forget. There was what was the costume that I wanted to bring up? Oh, I wanted to bring up Jedediah.
Jediah.
Jediah, yeah, basically because of the swag there. That's like full swag, but also the like kind of headpiece, and the
Yeah.
necklaces and kind of like the laid back attitude of it. Can you talk about that quickly? That also brings us into when we first see him too, talking about the dancers,
Yeah.
the blue and gold kind of dancers, and kind of like costuming that and dealing with paint. So please just talk me through that sequence.
Jedediah was one of the first references. James gave me about 5 references, and Jedediah's costume was one of them. Two, his head wrap, no, his head skull cap, which to me read like a crown. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he's the wealthiest man in this town. He's the most important man in this town,
Mm-hmm.
next to the Romans. And it just spoke to his stature, right? He was the wealthiest man in this town, and he owned a harem. He owned his own speakeasy. If it was
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta, it would be a stripper joint,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And he he flaunted it, because even when we see him when Clarence is speaking as a Messiah and he's in the audience,
Mm-hmm.
his clothes really stand out from everybody else's, and
Mm-hmm.
his jewels, right? So we got this cast late, like just before Christmas. And luckily for me, I visually had an idea because it was given to me. The costume that James shared was very Nigerian in its um in its background, in its story. It wasn't current, but this is a costume that had transcended time. Like it's the robes that had the big folds
Mm-hmm.
that they put on over top of the tunic. And what can I say? The chat My thing is, how historically correct is this? And then doing the research, finding that it did go back many, many decades. But how does this work within this story of all these biblical looking tunics and layered robes because it does stand out. So the fine line I had to walk, and it was challenging. Is this costume scared me like none of the others.
Mm-hmm.
That he needed to fit in and not be here. Even
Mm-hmm.
though he was elevated because he was wealthy, his costume still had to work within the palette and the organicness with the sheen. Like, his clothes got steamed. The others, of course, we could step all over them and they'd be fine to put on. But it needed to blend, it needed to work. And I hope it did. For me, I felt we accomplished it.
You did.
Elevated him without taking him entirely out of the movie.
He did. He felt
And
special.
recognize the silhouette. Yeah.
He felt
Yeah.
special and powerful without feeling so far elevated that he takes away. And then also then the Romans with that kind of like red and like that really separates them out. Like you can tell whenever you see
Yeah.
them. So you felt like he was of the town, but important. Um,
Mm.
Another character that I thought was handled really well was Verinia. Am I saying that right?
Verinia. Yeah.
Verinia. Anna plays her so soft and so kind, but then your costuming is like kind of otherworldly. It helps elevate her whole feeling. Like she's just kind of instantly like lovable and likable. Even down to when
Mhm.
we first see her in her hood, and her hood has like, I don't know what that fabric is called, but it's got kind of like the undulating. It's very modeled. It's like a modeled texture on it that just kind of felt. It wasn't flat.
You're talking the scarves
The
that
scarf that she
had
had,
the
yeah.
gauzy scarves
There
that
you
had
go.
the texture. Yeah, that fabric I was so blessed to find. I found it in another part of Italy. I went to a warehouse that we found different bolts of it in different colors, and
Hmm.
then that then inspired me to overdye some of them to deeper tones that I needed for this city. And why I liked it is because it was sheer. And I did use some hoods that flipped up and some on the background or taking robes and draping
Hmm.
that were dense. But for some of the cast and even some of the background with dark skin or people of color, because not everyone was black, um, to be able to have the light filter through and they not be in complete shadow. And that fabric helped me to do that,
That's
where we
cool.
could drape it. And Varinia is one of the places that you really see it with her. And the one of the apostles, Adam, that it just gave the DP an opportunity to shine light through it with the close-ups.
Then
And I love the texture of them,
no, the
and
texture
we
sticks
helped with
out.
the. Yeah, we did the texture. We even went further with the texture when we were over it to wrap it and wrinkle it even more so that it wasn't flat.
So texture did play a complete role, but you also had different stuff like we were talking about like headpieces and masks, and then also scale. So I want to talk about when you talk about scale, I wanted you to talk about the actor that is Omar Sy playing was it Barabbas.
Barabbas,
Bearvis,
yes.
incredible, but also just sheer size and scale, right? Being one of the bigger, taller people, and then along with
Yeah.
having kind of like the slave kind of background and kind of like the warrior side. I just want you to talk about that because you can very clearly when Elijah and Clarence go to that spot and they're with was it Asher? With
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Asher, you can tell there's a complete shift in terms of like these people feel like they're very much so separate from the town. So just kind of walk me through
mm-hmm.
that and then talk about costuming, and for Omar.
Wow. Um, Omar is a big man.
Hmm.
He's a very big man, and uh, one of the nicest actors ever. Lovely person, and I I needed, one of the movies that was a reference, obviously, was Michael Douglas in Spartacus,
Hmm.
and that scene with the gladiators. and the slaves. So I knew the story, and how do we make it depict it in this film without it being a complete, riff off the original. And I mean, the costumes are authentic to what they would wear.
Hmm.
And also within our budget, how do we reflect this organically? And we use some rentals, like some of the leather pieces were rentals, but a lot of the tunics we made in-house.
Hmm.
We made for the men. And separating out Omar, because we had to build that piece, that leather arm piece, and in multiples, and build it in Rome
You're
while I
talking
was in
like the one on the
Matera.
arm, right? The
The
asymmetrical kind
one
of
on the
signature.
arm,
Yeah.
yes, and then build his helmet. So it was interesting and challenging. I always love doing something new, but again, that helmet needed to be organic. And I think overall, you have to consider that this movie is, I always say to people, like, there's Gladiator 1 and 2, that level of opulence and wealth and Rome, and then bring all that down to a small town in Jerusalem, right? So you're talking Beverly Hills as compared to South Central or Compton or,
Hmm.
Watts. And even the mask had to reflect that it was not a wealthy
Hmm.
gladiator school, that they didn't have the resources of some of the bigger, probably more well-known, like at the Colosseum in Rome,
Yes,
right?
correct.
And I had to take that all into consideration. And then, of course, the clothes he leaves in. And then we see the transformation of Barabbas
Hmm.
from, and not with a lot. I mean, there are only a few pieces from when he walks out with that, that layer with that leather vest patched together. Then he throws a cloak over it when he has a little bit more money, and he adds a necklace that he may have been gifted or bought. And then when we see him at the party where everybody's in their party clothes,
Hmm.
and that is where I've made it. I'm no longer the slave, right? And that's probably one of my favorite costumes.
Hmm.
That costume, as well as Clarence's costume of that night. I mean, I have full video footage of the team it took to make that costume, because it was huge. It was big. We both could fit into that costume. Me on top of your shoulders.
Yep. Like we're sneaking into a party.
Yeah. But yeah, he loved that costume. He was he wanted to take one of them home with him. But yeah, that was an evolution that I wanted to show of, from the fighting slave in his tunic to the man who gets to wear his full length robe that is in hand embroidered, and showing that he's made it, you know. So I think, if anything, how I wanted to be able to tell the story in terms of evolution for these characters, with the quality of fabrics, the type of costume
Hmm.
that they ended up in at the end.
Hmm.
You see it subtly. Even Caleb's character,
Hmm.
who drove the chariot. He didn't have a chariot. He had like a horse-drawn buggy that he was his taxi. That was the Uber back then, right?
Yes.
And and I even had an Italian costumer say to me, "Well, why is his clothes so short? Why did you make his robe shorter than the others?" I said, "Because he's climbing in and out of a carriage all day long.
Correct.
He's handling horses. He's stepping up. Why would I put him in something long that he has to lift up every time he's getting up to sit,
Yes.
to drive?" And it's those things that you'd be surprised that people don't think about. Well, it looks different from the others. Well, it is. His role is different.
His role is
His
different.
action is different. His action is different, right? And Elijah, again, subtle. But with him, it was, he kept the same base robe tunic on. He's just, as they progressed and they got wealthier, his outer robe got nicer.
I also,
And then all of them added a little bit of jewelry as they went
as they
along.
went along, I noticed too, there
Yeah,
was one another character that stood out, which was because I love her, but Tiana Taylor as Mary Magdalene.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
in terms of like, how did you make her? She comes out, she's just so strong and confident, but I felt like that was in kind of the choices you made to talk about that a little bit for me.
Well, the first time we see her, she's kicking ass.
Hmm. Hmm.
She is kicking ass. And I mean, I needed to, without being religious and not following the rules, the steps of the Bible, the
Hmm.
stories of the Bible religiously, I wanted to give her costume a base the first time we see her. And once we get into Jedediah's harem, there's a lot of Roman influence in there in terms of the what the girls are wearing. And I wanted to give Mary Magdalene some of that she may have had enough money to have cloth or fabric to make her dresses or tunics from Rome,
Yeah.
and it was a little bit more refined than the average woman walking along the street. Like, she stood out. One of the specific jewelry that I was given by James, like, he wanted two people to have some type of face or head ornament, and that was Mary Magdalene and Jedediah. I
Hmm.
added Verinia
Okay.
because it just made sense to the story for me
Correct.
that his sister would also have
Would have
something,
something.
and it would appear that night, you know?
Hmm.
Um, but that Afar, the women of the Afar, very jeweled, very specific to Northern Africa face mask that was given to Tiana was something that the director wanted to have.
It was very nice.
And again, to make her stand out and show that she was special, and that she could afford something like that. The challenge for me is this woman's driving a chariot down a hill and it's a stunt.
Hmm.
So
Like,
I
how are you
needed to
gonna?
make it, I needed to adapt the original style. And I think there's a picture of me on Instagram wearing one of the originals
Hmm.
that was inspiration, and just making something simpler that gave that effect of what is something that is organic and authentic from many generations in that culture, but was stunt safe with the materials and the style. Her eyes were fully, like, you
Hmm.
could, there was enough room, whereas some of the originals you literally could barely see the eyeballs.
No, it looks like you
Um,
did a really good job custom wise because she's got very specific features too, very kind of commanding, domineering features like her cheekbones and stuff. Very beautiful face. And then it feels like you framed it perfectly where it was safe for stunts,
yeah,
but also kind of made her feel commanding. Like it's the
commanding.
performance is there, but the costume really helps. It solidified it,
Well,
I thought.
yeah, and also that breastplate, that
Hmm.
leather vest that she wears over her dress when
Correct.
she's driving the chariot, almost like her armor,
Hmm.
you know, but feminine, practical and feminine at the same time. And it was just very important for me that there just be one pop of color in that scene.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure where I was going to put it. And then we decided to put it on this on the cloak for her that she wears when she's driving the chariot. I wanted to see it billowing. I wanted to see that, the blue sky, the hit of color on her, and then the guys and the beggar just neutral. So that costume was when she was Mary Magdalene, the free spirit, the the wild child. And then when she is stoned, you notice she's stoned. She's in the cloak, she's in the dress, but her armor piece is
It's
not
gone.
there
Hmm.
because is gone because not only is she not driving her chariot, she's vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to show vulnerability there. Um, and her performance there it just touched like, wow, Tiana. Um, but after that, she transforms into
Mm-hmm.
looking like the woman of the village,
Yep.
and softer.
And,
And that was interesting.
and then in contrast to that, if I'm not mistaken, you also got a very nice shout out from James McAvoy for the costume that you did with him. If I
Oh
recall
yeah.
this, can you talk to us about that a
Oh
little bit?
yeah. He did. God bless him, because he knew he asked a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He gave me a shout out not only on GMAs, he gave me a shout out on the red carpet.
Mm-hmm.
So I thank him. We became fast friends after I almost killed him. He had an allergic reaction to the uniform that
Oh,
we had to get a doctor in to give him an EpiPen. So backing up, I
wow.
spoke to James McAvoy like the Thursday night.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to fly. We were both going to meet. I was in Matera. He was in London. We were going to meet in Rome the Friday, and he went to camera the Monday. So he only supposedly scripted and storyline had one change, and that was a robe, a toga,
Mm-hmm.
that he not only spoke to um, Clarence in front of the villagers
Mm-hmm.
and in front of walking, just before he walks on water, but also in the cell later. Um, but he didn't want to wear it. He wanted to wear armor.
He wanted armor.
He wanted armor. And I said, well, we didn't have armor for him. It was scripted that this is what he was wearing, and James was looking forward to seeing him in it. And he's like, yeah, that's all great, but I want to wear armor.
Mm-hmm.
Can you have armor for me tomorrow? And I said, I'll try my best.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like what, 9, 10 o'clock at night, the night before? Sure, we'll pull it out of our ass. That's what we do.
That's what costume designers do.
That's what costume designers do. So, I mean, I was able to find a armor. I wasn't the correct armor because, one, I didn't have enough time to research what does this person of this stature wear. I reached out to my brilliant crowd supervisor who was already in Rome fit-in background for that scene. And she had, already done the Roman soldiers and didn't have, and she says, I only have the guys that would be guarding Clarence. I don't have someone of that, stature, of that power. And so she started calling around my supervisor, and I'm literally en route to Rome now. So we found something to put him in just to say, can you at least try it and see if this is what you want? And when he tried it on, we both knew it was wrong. It was too opulent. So I need to bring it into the middle. It was just too, the king of Rome would be wearing something like that. But he had a mild reaction to it. And I gave him a
Wow.
little Benadryl. He's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, note to self, I'm allergic to horses. So make sure whatever uniform you find over the weekend.
Yeah, it's not made out of horses.
Nobody's worn a horse and been on it. So we were able to get into Peruzzi. They very kindly opened for us on the Saturday and Monday morning to continue pulling. And we pulled a few uniforms, and I, of course, gotten in touch with the first AD and said, please, can you flip the scenes? If the uniform works, he wants to be able to wear it, and that can't be first up. We need it to be the second scene. So all of that was done. But when he tried on the uniform first thing in the morning, he immediately reacted.
Oh,
And started to
wow.
go red, and his face, its mouth, you name it. Everything that you could think of an extreme allergic reaction started to happen. This man couldn't even talk. And we're calling the ADs, getting them to, emergency. We've got to get a doctor. We've got to get, and we're letting the set know. And then, of course, all the producers and everybody starts
Right.
coming down to the base camp. And then James calls me because they're setting up for the scene that he would be with Clarence in the toga. And he's like, just change him, put him back in. And he's like, no, he said he doesn't want to wear it.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to wear this uniform. He says, get somebody to stick him in the ass and wash the uniform. So I needed time to wash the uniform.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line is, doctor came, ambulance was standing by, they gave him a shot. My God bless my set costumer, Marcus, wiped him down, and he was able to go into hair and makeup, and you saw the color starting to get back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
But bottom line is, we washed and dried and disinfected that costume. He was able to get into it. He was able to shoot that scene and then tell everybody about it.
Wow. I didn't know this story. I didn't know that's a lot for one. That's wow.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be fired. Let me just take out one of our lead actors with a uniform costume he's allergic to. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was interested in that just because I have my history with both James and Omar is they're both in X-Men and I worked on those films for years. So it's like I'm always curious to see, like, it's always fun to see actors playing different roles and things like that. But that was interesting. Just their costume choices were good, but their roles were really great too. And I thought you did a good job kind of distinguishing them. So kudos to you, but also kudos to getting through that. That's always like very stressful when you have like your lead or like a main star and something's going on. So that's a good job.
Yeah. Thank you. I still have PTSD. I think my heart was just like, it was tough. And I appreciate that he understood
Mm-hmm.
how stressful it was for my department and thanked us.
It's excellent. Like class act. So I'm happy for you.
Yeah.
But also I wanted to close by saying, was there anything that you particularly really wanted to point out for your work in Book of Clarence that we haven't talked about already?
Thank you for asking. I mean, you mentioned earlier the jeweled head pieces.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't jeweled. No, that was Mary Magdalene, Jedediah and Verenia's crown.
Mm-hmm.
And we are costume designers that are hired to deliver our director's vision. And sometimes they lean on our expertise and sometimes there's some specific thing to their story that they want us to create that at times you hope that you can find that beat, that it works within the visual silhouettes. And this particular crown, I'll call it a crown for lack of a better word, I was concerned, would it look too modern?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's something that for James is visually, it's about telling the story as compared to whether it's period accurate. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not inaccurate. It is, I mean, headdresses were worn for men, during biblical times, just as it is throughout the periods. But this specific style was something that was important for him for this character. And my goal was just to make it less, I mean, it's almost a pewter. It's almost a metal that was beaten into that cutout and beaten into that shape. And that was what I was trying to achieve with both looks. And then the woman's one I found in doing research, I just stumbled upon this image of a woman in the early 60s, a model wearing something like that. And I thought, oh, why don't I create one for her that her brother may have made for her at the same time? He is the prince and she is the princess. You know what I mean? So it doesn't have any specific reasoning other than this was important to my director to show stature. And he is a Nigerian king, So that's how he wants his people to be portrayed. And that was my job to give him that.
I want to thank you for coming on the show today, and also for kind of like enlightening us on this. I want also to encourage anybody that's watching this to go and watch these films. Go watch Lift, go watch Book of Clarence. Pay attention to detail, pay attention to the amount of details, and now knowing the backstory for some of these things and also knowing the amount of prep, then you can really see the level of work that Antoinette is working at, the level that she's at in terms of like her aesthetic, her design sensibilities, and just resourcefulness. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today. I'm going to read. Oh, well, first off, I want to say, if you're on social media, please give everybody your handles and so they know where to follow you.
Okay, I am on Instagram at the real Antoinette Messam, and I am on TikTok, TikTok, at Messam, Messam, iStyle, Istyle, one word, Messam iStyle. Come follow me on TikTok. I'm having fun on it.
Please do, please do. And I want to do a special thank you again to our sponsors, Western Costume, along with a special thank you to founder, CEO, executive producer Martika Ibarra, and co-founder, costume designer Marilyn Vance and John Campea. Thank you guys for joining us. You can follow me on Instagram at Phil_Boutté, Boutte, and we will see you guys again. Thank you so much.